Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Trade and Tariff Virtual Roundtable discussions. We're so pleased to have everyone here to participate. We had a huge number registered, which was great considering it's the middle of August and prime vacation time. So thank you so much for joining us today. Following this session, we will have the recording available on our website as well as a white table that gives a brief synopsis of the discussions today. We've also scheduled our next roundtable discussion to take place on Friday, September 12th at 10 a.m. So that'll be ready to register for following this meeting. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for committing to strengthening Ontario's economic development through these uncertain and ever-changing unique times. Let's make this roundtable engaging and productive experience. We have Brock Dickinson again joining us. So for all of you who have been on these calls, get ready. He will call on you if you don't ask questions. And just as a quick overview of where we are at over the past month, despite ongoing trade discussions, there's no viable deal on the table. And Canada is refusing to accept a deal that doesn't protect our workers and industry, which is really great. Our federal and provincial leadership have been working hard to aid businesses most affected by the trade and tariffs and diversifying our export portfolios interprovincially and internationally. So as I said today, again, we have Brock Dickinson back to lead this session, and I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Brock for his participation and ongoing support of these sessions and of EDCO. I'd also like to thank you for your commitment to economic development in Ontario. Your engagement and contributions are vital in shaping the way forward in this complex and ever-changing landscape. So thank you for being here today, and I look forward to our discussions. And now over to you, Brock.
That's great. Thank you, Stephanie. And I appreciate the invite to be here once again. And these discussions are always interesting. And it's great to kind of hear the snapshots of what's going on in different communities. And so I'm looking forward to that part of things. But as always, I just want to take a few minutes off the outset to kind of share some thoughts on what's happening out there, what's coming up in the world of Trump and trade and tariffs. Can I ask, is my screen showing?
Your screen is showing. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Got some slight delays here, but how's that? Is that
Voila,
in
that
presentation mode?
It
Perfect.
is.
And as you'll recall, those of you who were with us when we did this last month, I've been calling this the summer of Trump. And I kind of feel a little strange about doing this in the middle of August, right? It's this sort of stuff's happening out there, but it's a little tougher to kind of keep tabs on it all and to kind of, be fully up to speed because we're all in a different mode at the moment. But I was reflecting with Stephanie and Laura just before we began that, I feel like there's a little more anxiety out there than, when we spoke last in July, I think part of the message was, hey, this isn't as bad as we thought, and there's actually some pretty positive signs emerging. I think that's still the case, but I think, the level of uncertainty that we're all sort of feeling around this stuff is maybe ramping up a little bit. And in particular, Stephanie mentioned this notion that we have no trade deal in place. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on some of this. And I would say that, one of the things we've seen a lot of out of Washington in the last few weeks is this notion that data is bad. Accurate data is particularly bad, and we don't want to see any of that stuff. So, early on in the Trump administration, we saw cuts to health-related data because we didn't want necessarily, lots of information about pandemics and deaths and all this bad news kind of coming out. And then we saw a sort of a move to eliminate data around something like climate change, right? Because if you believe climate change is imaginary, you don't necessarily want any data that contradicts you. And then more recently, we've seen the sort of the confusion around, workforce data and job creation data, and the fact that if the data is not good, you don't want to share that. And then absolutely most recently, this sense that, if the data shows that crime is falling, you don't want that to be out there in the public either, right? And so we've got this kind of strange situation where it's getting a little bit harder to track some of this stuff. I'm particularly intrigued by this notion that we're not going to track we're not going to believe crime data anymore. And Trump's recent comment that our capital city, Washington, D.C., has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals. I actually happen to agree with him a little bit on this one as I sort of reflect back on the last couple of years. But this is probably not what he had in mind as he kind of made those comments. And the reason I sort of single out this attack on data sources is that that is one of the interesting things we've seen from an ECDEV perspective over the last few weeks coming out of the Trump world. So the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a woman named Erica McIntyre, was fired as a result of a jobs report that didn't look good, and she was replaced by a guy named E.J. Antoni, whose big idea seems to be that the way you deal with troubling jobs reports is to just stop releasing them, right? Don't share the data, and the problem will go away. Here's the actual job report that caused the problems, right? And so one of the things that we're starting to see is that as we think about the impacts and the implications of what Trump's doing on the American economy, it's creating some real challenges. And this sharp drop in job creation numbers since Trump took office is one of the things that's signaling that the US economy is headed in the wrong direction. And of course, that's not a message that Washington particularly wants to hear. I'd say that that's, still in contrast with what we're hearing in Canada. So we've had two jobs reports since the last time we got together for one of these sessions. In June, we got a big surprise bump in job creation across the country. And in July, the numbers were essentially flat. The map that we show there is the July numbers. So, overall, we're still seeing some strength in our job numbers. The most recent numbers, not good, but not bad. We can see the Ontario rate sort of essentially unchanged. There was a little bit of job loss in the GTA over the course of the month of June that was reported in July. But generally, we're sort of seeing healthy job creation and healthy job maintenance across the Canadian economy. So I guess one of the questions I keep asking myself is why does it feel like we're kind of just waiting, right? Like we're in this kind of holding pattern. We're sort of uncertain about what comes next, and we're not sure what's arriving, with the next announcement or the next range of policies. And I'm sort of, it's interesting to me that everybody seems to be kind of feeling this, that we're more anxious, but there's not necessarily a reason for that, and we're kind of waiting to see what emerges next. And even the Royal Bank sort of picked up on this with a recent opinion piece that they published. Canada's economy might not be in a recession, but it feels like one, right? Like we're sort of uncertain about what's going on. And I think that part of that kind of comes to tracking what's happening on the trade and tariff front. So, again, this is CBC's regular reporting around what's going on in the tariff structure. And again, we can see that since we last met in July, there's really been two changes in the tariff structure. One on July 31st. This was the notion that on August 1st, everybody's moving to tariffs. We got whacked with a 35% tariff, but anything under CUSMA, anything under the free trade agreement is excluded from that. So it was kind of a negligible impact. And then on August 1st, the notion that we're going to have tariffs on copper. And again, that certainly impacted a couple of sectors, a couple of communities, maybe around the Sudbury area in particular. But this is not something that's played out sort of across the broad economy. And so not much has changed on this front, although there's been lots of talk about what these new tariffs mean. And I think that part of what's happened to kind of create the anxiety is that the White House keeps announcing these big new trade deals that it's making, right? Japan's done a deal, the EU's done a deal, and we don't have a deal. So it kind of makes us feel like maybe we're being left behind. We hear big numbers like 35% on July 31st, 50% on copper. That's sounding pretty scary. And I think it's this sense that there's movement elsewhere, but not movement with us that's creating part of the anxiety. And I would say that part of what we need to do is kind of scrape beneath the surface on these other trade deals. So the Japanese trade deal, for example, was announced by Washington as all these big things that are happening. But what got less coverage in the media was that the Japanese immediately said the next day, well, none of that's true. Then none of that's what we agreed to. None of that's what's happening. And so there's this sort of confusion about whether or not there was was a deal between the US and Japan. And the same thing essentially happened in the context of the deal with the EU, that the US announced a big series of deals that they've done with the EU, and the EU kind of said, well, sort of. So when we dive into the details of the deal with the EU, for example, the big win from the American perspective was that the US is going to be able to sell $750 billion in energy products to the EU over the course of 3 years. Now, that sounds pretty impressive. The U.S. also said that it's going to get investment from the EU, although it's unclear what that investment would be. Basically, everything else is going to be discussed later, right? So we've got these two specific things. One is vague investment, and the other is more specific. But when we dive into even the specific one, the only energy product that the U.S. produces that the EU really has interest in is liquid natural gas. Now, the US sells about $300 billion a year of liquid natural gas. So the notion that it could sell 250 billion a year to Europe sounds good on the surface, right? Like that's most of their supply already bought. The problem is that US companies sell their liquid natural gas into high demand zones. They basically get what are called spot prices because they wait till the last minute, see where the highest demand is, and they get the highest possible price for what they're selling. A structured deal to sell liquid natural gas to Europe wouldn't fit that category. And the price that those companies get would be much, much lower than those spot prices. So no US company is going to want to sell gas to the EU under this deal because they're going to lose a substantial amount of money by doing it that way. So even the most specific element of this US EU deal just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? It's not something that's going to benefit US companies, and it's not something that's probably going to happen. And all of this is kind of leaving behind this notion that the EU is not an organization that can make commitments for the member countries of the EU, right? Like it's a collective group. They can't negotiate on behalf of individual countries. And so all this really means is that lots of announcements, lots of noise, lots of buzz, lots of hoopla, but everything will be discussed later. There is no real deal here in the midst of all of this. And I think once we start to recognize that the deal with Japan is not really a deal, the deal with the EU is not really a deal, then it starts to feel like, hey, maybe we're not missing out on stuff as much in the Canadian context. Just because we don't have a deal doesn't mean that that's a problem in and of itself. And I think one of the things that we're starting to see is a growing recognition in the US amongst economists that a lot of what's going on here is actually going to be pretty bad for the American economy. So the data that I'm showing here on the screen now comes from the Yale University Budget Lab. And they're suggesting that, with one exception, which we'll come to in a moment, the country that's going to be hit hardest by all of this tariff stuff is the United States. That's that first green bar that we see there, negative zero point 0.4. That's the Yale Budget Lab's estimate of what the impact to the American economy will be of this shift to a tariff-based economy. So the US economy will shrink by 0.4% as a result of what's happening. Now, the only place that gets hit harder than the US, according to Yale University, is Canada. We're the yellow line at the minus 2.06. So, there's a kind of a mixed message here for us that as the US moves further and further into this space, there's going to be sort of a growing realization that this is bad for their economy. We have to recognize it's bad for our economy as well. And that's because we're more directly linked to the US than many other countries are. But there's this sense that as the US starts to come to grips with some of these numbers, the policies are going to have to change a little bit. And part of what has allowed this to continue to this point is just that Trump's team is not staffed with a lot of economists who really understand this stuff. So here's a picture from a Trump announcement just a few days ago. He's standing there. The fellow on the left of the screen is his chief economist. This is a guy named Stephen Moore, who advises Trump on economic issues. And one of the reasons this picture has caught everybody's attention is if you look right in the middle at the title of the picture in black on the second line down, it says medium income. And of course, for economists, there's no such thing as medium income. What it really means is median or sort of average or middle kind of income. And the fact that Trump's chief economist is here using a phrase that doesn't exist in economics is sort of a signal that maybe at some point this whole thing's going to kind of fall apart within the White House and different approaches will have to be pursued. And that sense that we're kind of waiting on some of that we can't really figure this out is sort of causing confusion everywhere. So over the last couple of weeks, the Bank of Canada decided not to raise interest rates in Canada. But the minutes of that meeting show that there was a lot of discussion and a lot of uncertainty because we just don't understand what U.S. policy is at the moment, and we don't understand where it's going. And typically, when we set interest rates, we're trying to kind of adjust demand within the consumer population in Canada. So if we raise interest rates higher, it pushes demand down. If we put our interest rates lower, it pushes demand up, and consumers drive behavior that helps to correct the shape of the economy. With tariffs, demand is not the issue, it's supply that's the issue. It's the fact that our supply is constrained by these artificial rules that the US government is putting into things, and it's unclear whether interest rates can affect that. And so the Bank of Canada itself is kind of reacting with a lot of uncertainty to what's going on out there. I think that that's the kind of the key of what's going on right now, right? We've got interest rate uncertainty, we've got banking uncertainty, we've got trade deal uncertainty, and so we're all kind of saying, I don't know what happens next. I don't know where this is going. I feel uneasy about the shape of things as they currently stand. I don't have a sense of what the direction is, and so it's really hard for me to advise my community, to tell my local companies what's going on, or to make suggestions to them. So in the midst of that, I again do see some positive signs around where we're headed overall. So just last week, FDI Intelligence, UK-based agency, kind of released data around investment flowing into Canada. And one of the things that we're seeing is record numbers of inbound investments coming to Canada from outside the country. That the number of deals, for example, that we have done in the first half of 2025 outstrips anything we've ever seen in Canadian investment history, right? Like the number of deals is rising substantially and seems to indicate that there's some good news going on. And part of what's happening here, they're quoting the head of Invest Alberta here, but this notion that companies are kind of shaking off the whole Trump and tariff stuff and saying, we need to think with a 15 to 25-year time horizon and not a 1 to 2 year time horizon. Trump will be gone in a couple of years, right? The control of Congress, the control of Senate could change in the next couple of years. So let's not think about what's happening today. Let's not get caught up in the uncertainty of this moment, but let's think longer term in terms of where we need to go. And I think in that context, we win. Canada looks pretty good from a long-term stability, long-term investment sort of perspective. And so in the midst of the uncertainty, I think that's the message that I've been trying to take away. Doesn't always work. I still feel anxious and uncertain sometimes. But in our last discussion, we kind of talked about this risk of recession, and our sense was, maybe we won't see recession in Canada this year because we're sort of seeing these bright spots in terms of what's happening in the economy that we weren't anticipating. And this notion that investment from outside of Canada into Canada is increasing is one more of those bright spots that suggests, yeah, lots of uncertainty, lots of challenges, some real issues in specific industries and specific places, but generally we might be doing all right in this context. And so, despite those high levels of uncertainty, a little bit of a sense that things may be okay. So as I say, I'm struggling with and wrestling with a lot of these ideas myself, but I'm really interested in kind of hearing what your experience is in the communities that you're working with. Is that uncertainty ramping up? Is the anxiety increasing a little bit? Or are people starting to take this in stride and realizing that maybe this isn't going to be as big a deal or as bad a deal as we thought things might be? Who'd like to kick us off? Janet. Oh, you're muted, Janet.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Brock, for showing this presentation and always providing updates as everything is going to change. One thing that I've been doing every 2 weeks is actually giving updates sector by sector on, depending on each sector, on what has been impacted by tariffs, such as wood and forestry. With more tariffs going on with 35%, and then they already had tariffs going on 14% a year ago. So, and then that impacts construction. And then there's more of issues on making sure that municipalities have the talent to build homes, to build all of these infrastructure along the supply chain. Because if you don't have people to build, and if our economy is hit, that's a huge issue. And I just want to ask one quick moment. Can I share a strategy guide that I actually created? I would love to give you this tool to everyone for it's easy, accessible for people to just take with and give it to their businesses for them to feel empowered to use on if they're affected by each of the sectors. I'm going to share screen right now if that's okay with you, Stephanie, on this guide that I've been working on. It's okay?
Sure. Yeah.
It sounds
Okay.
great, Janet. And you just got a big thumbs up from Luke as you were saying that, Janet. So this is obviously something that's of interest.
Sounds good. I'm just trying to find the share screen button because it just disappeared. Because I need permission. It says only organizers and presenters can share. So am I blocked, or can I get permission?
I don't think I have the capabilities now because the webinar's already running.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I'm just going to share the link right here. And if you could take a moment really quickly to just take a look at it in front of your screen right now, that would be amazing. Because it breaks down each sector from that has been impacted, and it might impact your community if you have industry in that. So it goes from automotive, agriculture and fisheries, energy, critical minerals, food and beverage manufacturing, wood, forestry, and construction. And it really breaks down into like cute little icons of things that businesses can do in the short term and long term because it's so hard to take it all in. Like you see reports and it's like 50 pages. No SME is probably going to read it. Maybe an EDO will, but I'm I created this with in partnership with York University to make it easy to take in, to see cute icons and think about, okay, I got to strategize like this if I'm working in wood and forestry. I need to think about my talent in this industry, or I need to start thinking about diversifying what I'm if I'm selling like automotive parts and it's really impacted, should I look into the nuclear sector, should I look into these sectors, and it just helps you take it in. So I would love for you to share it when we post it on LinkedIn. I actually got permission from York University to post it here because I want to empower you first before we publicly post it. It's going to be on the CFAL York LinkedIn. I would love to add you on LinkedIn so we can have a deeper discussion about that, so we all can feel like we're supported. So thank you for this time and platform to do this. I've just felt so supported because this webinar has helped me create a lot of my speakers that has created this guide. So thank you to Edco for helping.
Oh, that's
Janet,
awesome, Janet.
hey, can you let us know when we can publicly share it? We'll add it to our resource page.
Yeah, but yeah, feel free to share it to businesses now, or like if you want to read it, I want to empower you with it. But like online, I would love to for us to get like the first post, and if you could follow us, that would be great. But yeah, thank you. I will. It'd probably be next week, but I want to give it to you guys now because everything's going on.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's awesome, Janet. And lots of reactions in the chat as this is going on. But Luke, I saw a hand briefly. Did you have a question for Janet about this? I've lost Luke on my screen now. I see that Lydia has a hand up, though. Lydia, do you have a question on this or a comment?
No, I was just going to say this is great information. Thanks for sharing. It's always great when we pull together, right? It just seems like we're stronger in the data points. So thank you so much. I did want to make a comment with regards to our outreach program in Kitchener. We've been doing this now for a few months, and we're noticing that manufacturers are pretty much hovering and saying, we're not that worried like we were before. We're kind of just waiting to see what happens. We think that things aren't going to be as detrimental. But one thing that's popped up a few times now is that manufacturers are being approached by men in suits from the States, incentivizing them to move their operations to the United States. And they will help them based on what their requirements are. And they're saying, we will give you 5 years free tax, no tax, and we will help find you the facility if you come to the United States. So for me, that's a little bit of a red flag, but at the same time, not sure. I've only had a couple of manufacturers that have been able to provide proofs around those statements, because sometimes you don't necessarily know if that's true or not, right? But they have provided proofs from some southern states and their economic development corporations that have reached out to them stating these facts. So I'm curious to know if anyone else has heard the same or similar.
Let me ask then, has anybody had similar stories from their communities or similar concerns expressed by companies? Belinda?
Hey guys, yeah, I haven't experienced that, but to me, that's like an ethical thing. And is this something we should address with IEDC at all?
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
we're putting it forth to our Trade and Tariffs Committee, Brock. And then obviously, we would hope that some sort of action would be taken. But for us, it's a big deal. Our manufacturing consists of 18 to 19% of our workforce here in Kitchener-Waterloo. So that's a big deal.
So I have some limited knowledge in this space. I think that one of the things that we know about the Big Beautiful Bill was that it kind of created a series of tax incentives that are pretty hard to beat. And those tax incentives apply to things like real estate development, equipment purchases, et cetera, so that essentially you can do a lot of stuff at this point in the States virtually for free that would cost money here in Canada. And so
Yeah.
there is a bit of an imbalance in the tax situation that definitely incentivizes companies to go south. I think so far we've got a couple of things working in our favor, including the notion that the levels of uncertainty may be higher south of the border than they are north of the border. And so, what are you really investing into? You don't know. You don't know how long these rules are going to be there, how long these tax structures are going to be there. I will say that, as one of these guys in suits who does wander around talking to companies about financing, one of
Yeah.
the suggestions we've made to folks recently is that you could build a new facility in the States and get enough tax benefits out of that to build one for free in Canada. And so, sort of the notion that you could say to your companies, yeah, there's great tax incentives south of the border, and if you were open to open a branch plant south of the border, you could build a brand new facility here on the tax credits you get from that project. And so, trying to kind of sort of see that even in the context of those U.S. tax benefits, are they structured in a way that could create opportunities or advantages for Canadian communities as well? Stephanie and I were chatting just before the meeting about aluminum products and the fact that we've been really weak in the Canadian context on developing facilities for manufacturing aluminum products. But the fact that the tariffs are in place suddenly incentivizes companies to do that north of the border. And if you're looking at a binational play, the tax advantages of doing something south of the border that could finance an operation north of the border are really interesting. So some
Yeah.
nuances there that I don't think the U.S. has picked up on yet, but might be worth exploring more in the Canadian context as we go forward.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that that's a big deal. And then the other thing is, we're focusing a lot on the buy local, buy Canadian, but the manufacturers are saying, put your money where your mouth is. At the end of the day, it's about price point. And I have one manufacturer that has had Canada Post as their key client for at least 20 years, and they just lost them due to price to the States. So that's again detrimental, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Those are key logos for us.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting. I think, often the buy local stuff works well in certain contexts, like, food and ag or tourism, but
Yeah.
may not work so well when we're talking manufactured goods in a lot of instances. Yeah, yeah. Other
Mm.
people who might be experiencing some elements of this, anybody got some thoughts or ideas or experiences to share? Stephanie?
And there, yeah, it's interesting the hesitation. And I think that's what it is hesitation. We've been to a few companies who, in the uncertainty, they supply to the US, so they brought in a bunch of supply, or they are sitting on finished goods waiting to ship pending what's happening. So yeah, I would say, along with Lydia, the sentiment has sort of been, we think we'll be okay. It's hesitant. It'll happen. For those in industry who have sort of the IP, and they don't have there's not a highly competitive market. It's not necessarily a commoditized good. I think that's more optimistic than those 2 point that are price. I produce the good. There's other competitors. If I can't hit the price point, I can't make it. And we have one company who's sort of got, based on their diversity of supply, that's exactly it. They've got one line that's absolutely shut down and they've had to lay off, and then another side that's sort of actually growing. So it's an interesting conversation, but I think the key thing we're hearing now, just with time, is the hesitation. So the sales pipeline is slowing down. The sales pipeline is unknown. Things are being canceled, put off. So I think there's something perhaps to some of that lagging impact, that we aren't really seeing because everyone's still in a waiting game. So I think those are the things. And then the only other thing I wanted to put on the table, we just got a note from an employer today, who has raised a concern to manufacturers that they supply to in the US, have had, and in 2 different states, have had Department of Homeland Security come in and start analyzing their paperwork on their supply coming in from Canada. Is it CUSMA compliant or USMCA compliant? Is it? So I think there's a little fear factor around percolating from, is this a one-time, a couple of one-offs, or is this going to be a piece where US industry are being pushed a little bit on Canadian supply and being pushed to look inward? So that was an interesting thing. We just heard it today. I don't know if anyone else has heard it, but that's a whole new thing that we hadn't even considered.
Yeah, that's interesting to sort of think about the soft ways in which you can kind of intimidate folks that might be buying from Canada. Has anybody else heard of any of that from their companies? Apparently not. You may be the one to warn us first, Stephanie, which is appreciated. But yeah, I think, not inconsistent with things we've seen in other areas, whether it's, National Guard for policing or ICE enforcement at the different employment centers and things like that. This notion that you use your policing authorities to kind of intimidate people into the behavior that you want, and sending Homeland Security to see what's going on with your imported goods from Canada is kind of an interesting escalation of things. So definitely something to keep an eye on. I wanted to go back to Janet. There were a couple of sort of comments in the chat about the resource that you've shared, and we shifted directions as we went along. But Janet, I do see there's a question there from Johanna asking about whether you're looking at adding the tourism sector into the report. Is that something that you've thought about so far? Did we lose Janet from the meeting? Is maybe she'll hopefully she'll come back, and we might be able to sort of have a little bit more discussion around the tool that she shared. But I'm interested in those that might be working across bigger regions to kind of see whether this sense of uncertainty is out there. Usually, this is the point of the meetings in which I call on Jay Amer in Eastern Ontario to do things. I don't necessarily see Jay on the call this time, but I do see Anne Marie with FedDev, and I wonder whether. Anne Marie, I hate to put you on the spot, but whether, as somebody who's kind of working with an agency that covers bigger regions, are you seeing the same thing everywhere, or are you really seeing kind of different experiences in different places?
Well, Brock, I can only speak for where I cover, which is Kawartha Lakes down to Kingston. But I can tell you, I'm echoing a lot of what I'm hearing here in terms of the uncertainty. I've a lot of the companies that I've met with, excuse me, are looking kind of the 27, 28 year forecast. So a lot of them are planning on diversifying and trying to make sure that they have more than one market to serve. So we're seeing that. But we're getting a lot of interest in terms of applications and for people enhancing their productivity capabilities. A lot of interest around AI and digitization. So it seems like people are still moving forward. Now, we've seen a few hurdles in the Peterborough region with some announced closures. Siemens was a big one, Lufthansa, and also Minute Maid, but not all of those are related to tariff impacts. Some of those are just long-term company planning as well. But overall, again, echoing what I'm hearing here from other people, but again, a lot of people are seeking information to diversify, but I'm really seeing communities coming together as regions and trying to come up with plans. And what Janet shared here is fantastic. I can think of a number of ways that we can share this information. But, in response to that, FedDev did open for applications. So we've got an intake ready right now, and we are waiting for information in regard to the tariff relief program that hopefully will be launched soon by the regional development agencies. But yes, that's, again, a lot of uncertainty. People aren't sure what they're doing. We've seen some plans stall. So people that were planning on maybe doing an expansion or maybe looking at increasing their market share, maybe they've kind of toned that down. But overall, we're still seeing interest and investment.
It's great. Thank you, Henry. Can you maybe share a little bit more about this intake and what are the kinds of projects that you're looking for and who's the ideal applicant, that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, the ideal applicant, again, are companies that are looking to scale up or they're looking to, enhance their productivity or create new opportunity through digitization and new markets. So basically, the same priorities that we've had in the past. But again, we are open for the for-profit and for the not-for-profit. At this point, there's no closure date, so we're going to just continue to take applications on an intake basis. And if anybody is not sure who their officer is in their area, you could reach out and I can make sure that Stephanie has an up-to-date list, and she and Laura can certainly circulate that as well. But we're more than happy to meet with economic development officers or companies in the area for sure.
Excellent. And I'm sure that most people on the call are familiar with the program, but if you've got a chance, maybe you can throw the link in the chat again.
Absolutely,
just so
I can.
Everybody's got that fresh because we tend to forget these things after a couple of weeks. It's so busy with everything that's going on. But a great reminder that there continue to be great resources out there for our communities. Has anybody else got more of a kind of a regional perspective on this? Sort of seeing what's happening across a broader area and whether this is everybody's kind of impacted the same way or whether there's a bit of a checkerboard in the areas you've covered. I don't know if there's anybody from MedCat or from Invest Ontario or from others on the call this time around.
Brock, I'm Leeds Grenville, so county level,
Hi.
Eastern Ontario. Hi, I'm happy to share. We did a business survey just right in the whole as tariffs were going through. So it was an interesting feedback overall. We've only got a few companies that are of high concern, but the implications were more for us was on the importing side versus the exporting, because most of whatever is being from a CUSMA perspective, that seems to be more the challenge. Any projects that were underway seem to be continuing. What I've heard is they will continue through because it's already been budgeted on the development, but they may not go into full production until from the expansion side, they won't go into full production until they get a better lay of the land. So hesitation, but also investment. We actually just had a local company in Rockville do an announcement on an expansion. So that was good news to see, and definitely having the additional funds available for both small and large businesses. We've been pumping those heavily. to make sure that everyone can find the best avenue for them to secure additional funding and support where possible. The only, we have 2 duty-free stores in our region because we have bridges. Based on the bridge traffic right now, with the decline from US to Canada, that is definitely hampering those, and that's been in the news in regards to closures. We're hoping they can hang on, but that is definitely an area where it's in trouble. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, we continue to see sort of this decreased cross-border traffic. So if you're dependent on that, like a duty-free shop, it's really challenging. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Anne. Does that sort of match with the experience of others in other communities? Stephanie warned you. I'll start volunteering people if we need to keep the discussion going. I'm fascinated as well. Sort of how this plays out at the level of individual businesses. So you mentioned and the duty free shops and that sort of thing, but we talk a lot about the manufacturing space, about sectors, this sort of thing. But this obviously has a chilling effect on individual businesses, and I wonder to what extent that kind of shapes. Um, Entrepreneurial activity. And Kristen, I see a hand there. I'll come back to you in a moment, but I'm going to call on Chris Jansen, who I see is on the call from Innovate Niagara. This is one of the regional innovation centers that works with entrepreneurs. Chris, what are you seeing in terms of the volume of new ideas, new ventures, new entrepreneurs kind of coming forward with things to take a look at? Is that up, down, more or less the same in the midst of all of this uncertainty?
Thanks, Brock. Yeah, so I work for one of the innovation centers. So obviously my perspective is a little bit different than I think others on the call. So our numbers are pretty consistent, but software publishers, interactive media companies, for example, they've been dealing with a fairly hesitant American market for about 15 years now, right? Like there is like a deep sense of protectionism in the American, I don't want to say psyche or soul. But so it's the selling into the States for service providers or non-commoditized goods has always been somewhat challenging. And that's becoming more challenging, right? So, Brock, as I'm sure you're aware, just having an office across the border in Buffalo makes it much easier for service providers to sell into the States. So I think it's now, how do you actually mitigate this deep sense of they need to buy America first, right? Even if it's a better product or a cheaper product. So I wouldn't say it's new. It's kind of ramping up its intensity, if that makes any sense.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. And Kristen, you had a hand up. I want to give you an opportunity to join in on this as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, from City of Waterloo perspective, obviously we're seeing similar things to Lydia and Kitchener since our economies are pretty intricately connected. But more specifically, we've got an industrial park that we soft launched and we've started selling. So that's where we're seeing a bit of an impact too. So those FDI numbers are actually like that you showed. I was really happy to see those, but we had a Quebec company, for example, pretty much we were negotiating the deal like down to fine points. And they're like, well, I think we're just going to push pause and I think we're going to have to expand in the States. So I think there are, now they are in an impacted sector that's related to steel. So, I think some sectors we're going to see a lot more of that. Talking to, companies that are here, German-based companies that have, Waterloo as their Canadian manufacturing presence. We're also hearing that they may have to consider expansions in the US, but they are all pretty adamant that that would be like, dire situation for them. They do not want to if they don't have to. So I think there's a lot of just holding is what we're seeing.
And I'm curious, you sort of mentioned the Quebec company and a bit of a holding pattern, but I mean, you recently had, I'm trying to remember the name, was it Hinduja came in with a large investment to Waterloo? Is there a kind of a knock-on effect when a big announcement gets made? Does it prompt others to kind of take a look or kind of, come to the table or that sort of thing, or is the uncertainty still enough that that these are kind of one-offs and we don't necessarily see the bandwagon effect that we might hope for?
Well, I think because they were more of an office space user, right, than an industrial space user.
Yeah.
So I think the announcements, good announcements, do make people sit up and pay attention that there's things happening still. And I do think that, you know, I think once we can kind of get through knowing where the next iteration of Kuzma, I think right now that's where a lot of the angst is coming from too, because it's a short runway we have, and it doesn't seem like negotiations like this person can negotiate. So when that deal gets opened up, what's that do? I think that's some of the things we're also hearing is, it's great for the next however, year or so. So hopefully we keep seeing the investment coming. And I think that, certain sectors, as you noted, are being impacted much more readily than others for sure. We hope they keep their hands off software.
Yeah. So far, so good. Has anybody else sort of seen that over the last month or two? Even domestic investors, in this case, a Quebec company, kind of saying, "Well, wait, maybe we need to put this plan on hold." Is that? I mean, we've seen that internationally with the Japanese, auto parts companies, that sort of thing. But are we seeing a little bit more of that closer to home? Susan?
Yeah, I just have a little bit. I think maybe Brock, maybe you were talking to one of our manufacturers because they did. They're in the aluminum industry, and they did indicate they might be, taking advantage of, um, some of those U.S. opportunities to build something in the States and essentially expand their Canadian operations up here for free. So, um, but overall, we just had a report from FedCap this week, and it seems across Haldeman, Brand, and Norfolk, we've got manufacturers are not layoffs per se, but they have hiring freezes kind of across the board in manufacturing. Retail, they say, is still strong, but manufacturing has definitely taken a hit. And we have seen, though, some small operators, some small folks in the food space who have identified some opportunities in the mix too for some that have said, hey, we're not, we're a smaller operation. We have distribution, to grocery stores in Canada, and not really impacted by the tariffs at all. But they see it as an opportunity now to, promote that Buy Canadian, tap into that sentiment, and in some cases, as these things from the U.S. are not going onto the shelf, it's good opportunity for them. So, on the other hand, for the growing season, I think there's a note I had that greenhouse businesses, many of them ended the season early due to the higher costs related to tariffs and reduced orders. And we also had spring layoffs for both local and migrant workers. So loss of 1 to 2 weekly shifts. So that's what I have to report from Haldeman Norfolk Brant.
Yeah, that's interesting, Sue. And you talked about how some of the companies, the smaller ones, are sort of seeing those opportunities, new markets, a bit of expansion. And I don't want you to share anything that you can't talk about, but are there particular products or particular things that they're identifying as opportunities?
Well, you may have seen a news release that some products just aren't available in a lot of places. 25% of the pickles from Bix are off the shelf in Canada. So that's definitely one of them that we have some folks who already had some plans in the works. And so they're really looking at this as maybe an opportunity.
Excellent.
And some folks in the popcorn industry as well, which is another one of our local specialties. So,
Oh my gosh, Susan, this pickle conversation makes me laugh. Did you hear Pamela Anderson just came out with her own pickles called Pamela's Pickles?
get out
Sorry,
of
I just
here.
had to add a little humor into this conversation.
I'm definitely looking that up.
Yeah, this it just went live this week. She's doing a test run.
Pamela's Pickles.
It's a co-branding opportunity coming up.
Yeah.
I'm curious as well. So you talked about some red flags in the greenhouse sector. In our last call in July, we heard from I think the Leamington area about how the greenhouse sector was kind of on the upswing a little bit. I don't know if anybody's from Leamington or the surrounding area on the call today, but whether you're still seeing that or whether that has declined a little bit. Wendy?
Yeah, so not Leamington, but Windsor, Essex. Yeah, so they seem to be, there was a lot of concern in the greenhouse industry when the at the very beginning of tariffs, because it seemed like everything was going to be tariffed. But no, they seem to be, as far as I can tell, they're for the most part doing okay. As far as I've heard, there are some sort of narrower areas of concern, but I think broadly, they're doing okay. A lot of the greenhouses, obviously, so we have the largest, which you would have heard on the last call, I'm sure, the largest vegetable greenhouse cluster in North America, but probably second largest in the world. So the Leamington and all sort of concentrated in Leamington, Kingsville area. So yeah, and a huge employer and so on. So latest I heard there is still some concern, but for the most part, they're doing okay. I wanted to chime in a little bit as well, since I have the microphone. That building on what a couple of other people have said in terms of the manufacturing sector, and I know it's affected across the province, but I think here we have had more of an impact, simply because of our more than 20% of our workforce is manufacturing, and it's largely automotive and very integrated with the US, of course. So we've lost roughly 10,000 manufacturing jobs since January. So it's significant. So there are layoffs. It's not just a hiring freeze. I've talked to companies that have laid off the majority of their workforce. So not all, but many, and a lot of these companies have been struggling since early 2024 with the EV transition and all of that, and the ends, because there's been uncertainty for us, for more than a year and a half, and with a lot of projects being awarded and then delayed or canceled, companies, and I know somebody was saying, like, seeing finished projects on the floor. Yep, I've definitely seen that as well. But also we've also seen raw steel on the floor that's been ordered because a company was awarded a project and then the customer said, oh, nope, sorry. So then the steel just sits there because they've had to pay for it. So, we're seeing huge impacts across a lot of companies. We have related to automotive, but a lot of tooling companies and automation companies, and similar impact. We tend to be sort of the canary in the coal mine because of that sector, because those projects are awarded earlier on in the timing of new model development for automotive. So, we see that being sort of impacted earlier. One thing I wanted to mention, just because it hasn't come up, and I don't think it's unique to this one company that I talked to, but sort of an unintended, maybe I'm sure unintended by President Trump, impact of the steel pricing and the steel tariffs. Company in late 2024 had been awarded a project. They're an automation company, and got some steel quotes. The lowest quote was from a Canadian company, Canadian steel producer. A month later, that price increased by 60 to 70% from the Canadian company to supply a Canadian company. And the tariffs were not even in place yet. So what they'd already quoted to their customer, what they ended up having to do was get their steel from China. So, sometimes the increase in pricing means that the Chinese input ends up being the more affordable one. So it's, that doesn't help anybody, obviously. So yeah, just sort of wanted to mention that. And what else? Oh, the other thing too with that hasn't quite come up yet was with this holding pattern that everybody sort of seems to be in, or for us in some cases, downsizing, there's a huge fear of losing your skilled workforce. And I'm sure other communities are seeing that as well. Companies are desperately trying to find work for these people because they don't want to lose them because they could go anywhere, So there's a huge worry about that, about losing, because there is the feeling that it will come back. And somebody had mentioned that as well. Like there is sort of the general feeling that it will eventually, people are going to drive the same model of car for the next 15 years, right? Like they're going to want some change at some point, and they want to still have their workers when this starts moving again. So that's all.
Wendy, I'm interested in exploring that a little more detail. And yeah, I apologize for kind of glossing over the auto sector in the start of the session.
No,
We talked last time as we dove into the numbers around what was happening in different sectors about how transportation generally, the auto sector in particular, are really being hard hit through this process, and that's where we're experiencing the sort of the greatest sense of weakness. But I'm curious that you're sort of saying, this can't last forever. The companies are sort of telling you that they're looking further down the road and seeing that things will change. Is that, are there specifics around that? Are they sort of saying, the U.S. can't do this without us for 5 years or 10 years? That, or is it just a general sense that eventually things will correct?
No, I think they just don't see, we hear this in other sectors as well, but I hear this a lot. And I hear it from companies that have facilities in Canada and the US, or Ontario and Michigan, that they cannot find the skilled workers in the States that they have here. They just don't have this. So they really, really don't want to do the work there. It's, so I think the feeling is, it's really not going to make sense for certain types of work to go to the US, just because there's not really anybody there to do it. And I've heard this in other sectors as well. Like, how long does it take to to build a lumber mill, for example? This is not something that's going to happen in 6 months. So, and I have heard from some companies that quoting has increased. So they have had customers do a lot of quoting. The challenge there too is that it's hard to quote because they don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs. And when they get quotes for their inputs, those prices are in effect for 48 hours. So, it's hard to really, unless you have an agreement with your customer of who is going to, and the customer decides that they're going to, take on the risk of the tariff, which maybe if it's a tier one or an OEM, but farther down the supply chain, they're less likely to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm thinking out loud, but that sort of suggests an area where, maybe Ministry of Economic Development or Industry Canada or somebody could put together some sort of a training, learning system to sort of help us figure out how to bid in this kind of uncertain context, right? Like if prices change every 48 hours, what are the strategies or techniques for being able to quote in that sort of a market? And that's above my pay grade, but there may be some interesting tools and resources that we might be able to kind of find a way to draw on. So that might be something to kind of see if we can push that up to senior levels to help us figure that one out.
And just to say too, we do see a lot of, and I'm sure the other communities have seen this as well, a lot of uptake on the Ontario Together Trade Fund, which is good because you have to have at least $250,000 to invest, right? So it's a 250. Anyways, you have to have some money to invest. So good news is that a lot of people are wanting to invest. The bad news is I understand the program is way oversubscribed.
So maybe some additional resources pointed in that direction would be helpful. Yeah. Excellent. I'm conscious of the time. We're coming up on the 11 o'clock hour, and as always, we don't necessarily stick strictly to that time frame, but I do know that people have other things in their day. Maybe as a sort of a final question, I'll just, we got the great resource from Janet. We've had references to a couple of the funding programs, including FedDev's funding that Anne Marie talked about. Are there other resources, toolkits, information sources that people have found over the last few weeks that they have found really helpful and would recommend to others or suggest to others? Lydia?
Hey, yes. I wanted to end it off on a good news story. So WEDC, so Waterloo Economic Development Corp, has created a really helpful tool for companies that are exploring expansion, more so on the tech side. So it's like a tech talent calculator that lets you compare the full cost of building a team across key North American hubs. So if you'd like, I'd love to share the link and feel free to spread the news. But I think it just gives us a good news story for U.S. companies that are thinking about building out their teams and sourcing local talent here.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely throw a link in the chat if you can, and
There you go.
want to take a look at that.
Sure.
Anybody else found any interesting tools or resources that they want to share? All right. Well, I'm not hearing anything further at this point, so I'll just say that as I mentioned at the outset, coming into this meeting, I was sort of feeling like I'm uncertain. I don't know what's happening. I'm nervous because we don't have a trade deal, and everybody else seems to be getting them. But as I sort of dove into things, I think there hasn't been a lot of action. We are in the midst of the summer, for the province and the feds. The houses aren't in session. There's not a lot of policy decisions being made. We're not seeing a lot of advancement of trade discussions. So I think it's only natural to feel increased anxiety at the moment. We're all going through that, but the messages coming out of the economic data continue to be relatively positive. Obviously, some real challenges for specific sectors, the automotive sector, the forestry sector. But by and large, we seem to be holding our own. And so hopefully, as you continue to do your work in your communities, there's some positive messages to share with your local businesses and with your councils and key decision makers. But as always, I appreciate the chance that people are the fact that people have shared so much over the course of this hour, and hopefully everybody's taken away at least one or two things that help to minimize the uncertainty as we work through this summer of Trump. Stephanie, I'll turn things back to you.
Thank you again, Brock, for your presentation and for leading this conversation. I think these sessions are so great because it gives us a chance to share and kind of learn from each other and hear what's happening, help mellow out maybe the fears and see some opportunities. I'd love to remind everybody that our next Trade and Tariff Roundtable discussion will be held on Friday, September the 12th, and Laura shared the link in the chat. It'll also be on our website. So thank you, Laura, for that. We also have two regional events happening in the fall. We will be in Burlington on September 11th, and that agenda is highlighting downtowns. And then on October 2nd, we will be in Rideau Lakes with an interesting agenda that's concentrating on building community assets and how that may attract investment as well as workforce development, growing agritourism industry, and how the trade and tariff climate is impacting border communities. Also, please save the date for our annual conference. It's Monday, February 2nd to the 4th, and registration will be opening mid-October. I also wanted to remind everybody that the MedCat Trade Impacted Communities Stream 1 Community Economic Development is open, and it closes on September, or no, it doesn't close, sorry. Stream 2, the Transformational Projects, opens on September 11th. And for our rural communities, the Rural Ontario Development Program Intake 1 is now open, and it will close September 24th. The second intake will be open in January. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to the next session in September. Have a wonderful day.